welcome to our new podcast, First Word in Sport. I am one of your co-hosts, Luke Payton. This is
James Roberts. How are you doing, Luke?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you, James. So we have had the idea of doing a podcast for quite some time. Obviously, lots of talking about doing a podcast, but we're actually finally here. We had tried to record a podcast on Monday. It was successful, but it wasn't quite right. So what we're intending to do is do 2 podcasts a week, one on a Monday morning and then one on a Friday morning. This is being recorded on Friday morning. This will be looking ahead to the weekend sport and looking back on the midweek's action. The Monday one will basically be looking back at the weekend's action. To give you a little bit of a background on both of us, I am a professional gambler by profession, and what it really enables me to do is watch an awful lot of sport over the years. And what I don't want is this podcast to be just about sports betting. I want it really to showcase the passion and just love that we actually have for sport. Get to watch an awful lot of it. So hopefully the opinions that we put across will carry quite some merit. James, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, similar. I've been working in the betting industry since 2002-3. 8-10 years at Betfair in the operations department, which was good fun back in the days. And then now working for another betting company. I've basically watched sport all my life. I was very fortunate growing up with parents who love sport. I love sport, and I've watched as much as I can do. And hopefully I've got some views and opinions that you might not hear in the mainstream media.
So I think that's the thing, wasn't it, is we're not hugely appreciative, I don't think, of what's currently out there in terms of the mainstream media. I mean, a lot of it to me is quite lazy. Some of it is obviously clickbait, but I don't think generally sports are covered particularly well. I mean, what do you think?
Some of it is, and some of it isn't. I think some of it's they've got to protect their contacts within clubs or in organisations, and they can't criticise certain players or certain managers or certain individuals. I just don't think always they have a great view, these ex-players, and they just always believe in one way and they won't ever be told a different way. Now, we probably are similar in terms we're not always going to be right or wrong, but we just hope you give a different viewpoint, different analysis, and hope you enjoy it.
I think the one thing I would say is that doing the job I do is I have to often back my opinions with my money. So I'm always a big believer in skin in the game. It's very easy to talk about things, but it's something else when you actually have to put hard-earned money down and try and earn a living as well. So I hope that would be one way that we potentially differentiate ourselves to others. Okay, let's get into this week's look back on what's happened. Obviously, we had a big week of European football. There were lots of high-quality games. I think on paper, it was certainly the most interesting set of Champions League games by a distance yet this season. I mean, you obviously had Arsenal versus Bayern, you had Paris Saint-Germain Spurs, you had Liverpool PSV, Chelsea Barcelona, Marseille Newcastle, Man City Leverkusen. Which of any of those in particular that sort of caught your eye, James, in terms of what happened?
Well, the 2 big games were Arsenal Bayern. Arsenal fine start to the season continues. 1-3-1. Take from that is Arsenal are just full of confidence at the moment, and you can see that in their play. They're very well drilled at the moment, and they're a hard team to beat. Bayern, missing Luis Diaz, how much of that difference did that make? Probably quite a bit. Early in the season for them, I don't think the Bundesliga, as we all know, is not the strongest league in Europe. the one takeaway from that is the new superstar. They've got the 17-year-old kid, Cole, who looks an absolute brilliant talent. Where he plays when Musiala comes back, along with Elise and Diaz, etc., will be interesting to see his development under company. Across London to southwest London, Chelsea, Barcelona. All the noise from Chelsea beating Barcelona 3-0. Was it 3-0 or was it 2-0? 3-0 in the end.
3-0.
Barcelona aren't great travellers away from home under Hansi Flick. There has been some rumours that the players don't like his tactics this season. Can't see Flick lasting much past the summer of 2026 there at Barcelona. Chelsea, yeah, they're improving. They've got Caicedo, who I think is the best midfielder in the Premier League. All the talk about Declan Rice, Caicedo can do what Declan Rice does on a higher level, I think. Marseille, Newcastle. Newcastle took the lead. Predictable loss from Newcastle. What was Nick Pope coming out there for that? It's a great finish from Aubameyang, by the way. It's not being talked about. People just say,
Who?
yeah, no. Yeah, I call him in French. It's a great finish. It's not being talked about enough. It's a brilliant finish from that angle. Man City making 10 changes. Guardiola thinking it was an easy game against Leverkusen. Didn't turn out to be. 10 changes is an awful lot, as it proved. PSG scoring 5 against Spurs. Spurs will come on to Thomas Frank. And then the elephant in the room as a Liverpool fan. Liverpool 1, PSG 4.
Right, we'll talk about that in a minute. I'll make a couple of observations from what I saw this week. I think, touching back on the Man City and Pep, I think City should have had enough quality to see that game through. You look at the starting lineup. That starting lineup cost an awful lot of money. It's always difficult when you make that many changes. But I think Pep can probably feel a little bit let down by his City players. But we see it time and time again. Is when you bring in players who haven't been playing that much, they're just not as sharp as you would hope they would be. Marseille, Newcastle, I think this is going to be really interesting for Newcastle because these are the really tough away games in Europe, which actually have a big impact on your next fixture. So they've got to go away to Everton on Saturday. That becomes a much, much harder game, having been to Marseille in midweek. So it'd be interesting to see if Newcastle can build on the City result they had last week to try and pick up some league form. But I think it's going to be really tough for them. I think the big takeaway from Chelsea, Barcelona was that Barcelona's defence is absolutely horrendous. And it wasn't just the fact that Chelsea scored 3 goals, and obviously the sending off didn't help them. It was a ridiculous sending off, having got a silly first yellow card. They had, I think, 4 goals disallowed for offside, Chelsea. I mean, it wasn't a case of, they just took their chances. They were really, really dominant. Barcelona looked dreadful. I think the Paris Saint-Germain Spurs gone.
So I go back to Barcelona. That Torres miss after 7 or 8 minutes is absolutely shocking. I mean, it's harder to miss than score.
And I think people underestimate that at times in terms of the importance of taking chances like that. If Barcelona score that, I think it's a completely different game. I think Paris Saint-Germain Spurs, rarely do I watch a game that finishes 5-3 thinking if there'd only been 2 goals in this game, it wouldn't have been a surprise. It's just a baffling scoreline, really, given what actually transpired. Vitinha obviously scored a couple of great goals. Spurs self-destructed a little bit, particularly that 3rd goal, just really poor defending. But I think there were some encouraging signs for Spurs in that first half compared to what we have seen a little bit recently. Arsenal are good, really good. And, obviously the first goal, another corner, I do think they're going to have to stop this situation where they're making contact continually with the keeper, blocking the keeper, disrupting the keeper, affecting the keeper's ability to play the ball. They did it to Neuer. Neuer ended up getting nowhere near where he needed to. I find it all a little bit crazy. But and what was interesting about Carl was I was showing my 9-year-old daughter just yesterday. There's an amazing clip. Check it out on Twitter of Carl when he was, I think, 11 years old. He's playing in some old sports hall in Germany, and he scores one of the most outrageous goals you will ever see at the age of 11. And I think judging by how he played on Wednesday night, the future is pretty big for him. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, James. Obviously, you are a Liverpool fan. One of the things which we had touched on in the sort of podcast that didn't get released on Monday was Slot and the problems that Liverpool have. You've been an advocate for Slot to not be manager of Liverpool any longer, or his job to be in danger for several weeks now. I think of another loss against PSV. Tell me where you are currently with Arne Slot.
Collective P45. I think I texted you. I need to have a look 6 to 8 weeks ago now, looking at Liverpool fixtures, looking at the next 10 fixtures, and said if he lost 9 out of the next 10, would his job be under threat? And I think your reply was, that's wild, surely it can't happen. Here we are 12 games later. Well, 11. The League Cup isn't a relevant game of football, considering the team they put out. They've lost 9 of 11. That's absolutely relegation form of the highest order, let alone for a club that's champions last year, let alone for the stature of the club, let alone for the money spent, although they did recuperate £250 million in the summer. It's unacceptable. And I don't feel Slot has a way of getting out of the issues. Even his press conference after game on Wednesday, he talked about, I don't understand how we're in this situation. That's extremely worrying to hear from a manager talking about that in public. Even if he thinks about it in private, just don't say anything in public about it. Don't even just put out normal replies, very generic replies that they all taught how to do. Don't say that in public. And the face on him after the result showed to me that he's reached his end of ideas.
Okay, so let's go back to not the beginning, but the beginning of the problems, shall we say. So obviously, I think they started, it hasn't been an issue. It's not been a case of the issues happening just this season. You could certainly see the issues coming back end of last year after the title had been secured, and even potentially before the title had been secured.
It's definitely before the title. It was in March when a certain individual told Liverpool Football Club that he was going to sign for Real Madrid. He knew he was signing for Real Madrid 18 months ago, but when he officially told Slot in March that he was leaving, Slot, and then he got injured against PSG at home, when we were actually dominating the game, he got injured and Bradley had to come in. Bradley's a good ball carrier. He's not a progressive passer. Same as Konate, can't pass the ball. But we got away with it because of form of Gravenberch and McAllister and Van Dijk. Salah was having an all-time great Premier League season, arguably, but it is the best Premier League season ever by a player. But this season, they have worked out that none of the back four, bar Van Dijk, can pass the ball. So now you stop the passing from Van Dijk. There's nowhere for the back line to go. There's no progression into midfield. And then Slot, for some reason, with his obsession of the PSG midfield, has asked the 3 midfield lads, Szoboszlai, Gravenberch, McAllister, to rotate all the time. That's fine in French Ligue 1. Doesn't work in the Premier League. As shown on Wednesday night, when they lose the ball high up, there's absolutely no midfield. The second goal is a classic example of that. There's no ball progression from the back into midfield. They're asking Salah and Gakpo to be wingers, out and outright wingers, which is not their game. It's like ridiculous tactics. And he's shown no way of improving Liverpool as a club, as a team. And it's time for him to go. And then you're going to ask me who I think should take over. I don't know. There's been talk from people about Glasner. It's a big jump up from Crystal Palace to go to Liverpool. Inzaghi, who's in Saudi Arabia, is the one. He's got proven pedigree managing a big club. He did do a good job at Inter Milan. He got to 2 Champions League finals. That's impressive. How little money there is in Italian football. Iraola, is it too early from him? It's a big jump from Bournemouth, but it's the same from Slot from Feyenoord.
Iraola would make me nervous, I think. I think there's certain things I've seen in recent weeks that I'm not sold on him potentially in quite the way that would have been maybe 6 months ago. So it looks like, the talk is that they're going to give him 2 more games that he has to win. Those games, obviously, you got West Ham away this weekend, and then who else do you have? Who's your next fixture against after that?
Sunderland Wednesday night.
Okay. Right. So
and Leeds away on Saturday night.
So you can understand why the board, the expectation is there that they need to get wins. The worry I would have as a Liverpool fan is always this: I think he's shown that there are limitations in terms of his tactics, and beating a West Ham or a Sunderland, it doesn't necessarily show that he's actually resolved the issues. All it does, it just pushes the issues further down the line, and it takes you longer to actually sort of resolve the issues.
Correct. What happens on Sunday if Liverpool score in the 88th minute from an absolute worldie from someone, win 1-0? It doesn't solve any issues at all. Still just hiding the major tactical and the major issues within the football team. It makes no difference whatsoever. You beat Sunderland at home from a 95th minute goal that they started the season. And is that just because, oh, wow, got 6 points from 6 points from 2 games even? Then you go to Leeds, who Parker might not be in a job by then. You win there, but that makes no difference, those 3 results at all. Well, I think
go on.
That FSG are just looking around, scouting for or talking to other managers at the moment. That's what I think they're doing. I don't think they'll sack Slot without having someone else in. And I think they are going to sack him.
Well, I think Ten Hag was always the poster boy, wasn't he, for results, keeping a manager on for, the odd result rather than actually, how a team is playing, when they obviously gave him a new contract and kept him on before sacking him 3 months later. Okay, right, that's enough Liverpool for now. One observation from the week is Champions League format and just the European formats in general. As a Villa fan, I was intrigued by obviously the Champions League last year. I quite like the format. I do think Manchester City's and Pep's attitude to the game this week, where they rested pretty much the whole team, is something that we will potentially see more often. Obviously, those first or the top 8 places in the league are massively important because they obviously give you effectively a bye into the quarterfinals. I think whilst there's no differentiation between finishing first and, say, 8th, you are going to get some of these bigger teams potentially resting players. And in some respects, I'm surprised that it hasn't happened more. I think, Arsenal are not far off a position where, from memory last year, I think it was 17 or 18 points got you into that top maybe in 16, it was like 16, 17 or 18 points, got you into those top 8 places. Arsenal are almost at a stage now where, one more win and they're guaranteed to finish in the top 8. I mean, they could literally put out any team for those remaining games. Obviously, it's prize money and things like that. But if they want the very best players playing in each week, they have to just tweak the format so that actually you get rewarded for finishing first rather than 8th.
I think I said to you last year that when Liverpool finished first or second, can't remember, they chucked the game away against PSV in the last game, so they'd already won 7 out of 7. Wouldn't it be fun that if you're in the top 8, you have a choice of who you play at the teams that finish 9th to 24th? Just a little bit of say, okay, I fancy playing, rather than it's 9 versus you have one plays 24, 2 plays 23, etc., etc., etc. Wouldn't it be funny if number 1, say Arsenal finished first, that they had a pick of who they wanted to play in the last 16?
So I was having a chat to a friend this week about this, and I think we concluded that you'd be better off doing first versus 24th, or the top seed plays the bottom team, and the reason being is, let's say you're like a bit like Man City last year, where you're struggling to qualify. Oh, and the same with Paris Saint-Germain last year, is where you're struggling to finish in that top 8. Again, you have no incentive to actually finish as high as you can, because what is, let's say Arsenal finish top. Arsenal aren't going to pick your team. They're not going to pick to play a Paris Saint-Germain or a Man City in that first knockout stages anyway. So what you'll end up with is something not too different anyway. So the big teams will escape the jeopardy, whereas if a big team has finished much lower down, there is they're going to have a harder first match.
Sure, but I think you're not rewarding your teams finishing in top 8, whether you've had a better.
Well, you're still rewarding them.
But why
would you potential tie?
But say Arsenal have to play PSG in the last 16 because PSG have had a terrible group stage, and Arsenal actually want to play Union Saint-Gilles, or they want to play Frankfurt, or they want to play Atalanta, whoever they want to play. Wouldn't you reward the top 4? It's worked they tried it in Rugby League, I want to say 7, 8, 10 years ago, and it worked for a couple of years. And I don't actually know why they got rid of it. But anyway, I thought it'd be something different, it'd be quite entertaining. And there's your team talk. If you're the opposition, well, they picked us. They don't obviously rate us, which is probably true. They don't rate you because they picked you. But anyway, I thought it'd be something, be interesting. It will never happen. But anyway, something.
Well, I think what's clear is as more teams take the approach City did, that they will probably have to tweak it at some point. I think the other thing that obviously stood out in Europe this year is just how strong the Premier League is. Obviously, it's not been the best, obviously, midweek for Premier League teams. The City losing, Newcastle losing, Liverpool losing. But there are a few reasons. Obviously, Newcastle had a tricky game. City obviously rested a lot of players. I think you only then have to look at the Europa League games, the Conference League game last night with Palace. Is again, obviously they lost to Strasbourg, but it's the Premier League is so strong, and I think the thing that really stood out to me this week, it isn't necessarily even the depth of the Premier League. It's just the quality of defences around Europe outside of the Premier League. So if you think about Arsenal, nearly all their success at the moment is built around having an unbelievable defence. Week in, week out, they have to, show their quality and their defensive capabilities. They can't just turn up and batter teams every week. Barcelona and other teams like Paris Saint-Germain, Bayern Munich, week in, week out, they're simply not tested. And defensively, they don't need to be great defensive teams. And they are so poor defensively. And I think some of that comes from just the fact that they don't need to be great week in, week out.
Completely agree with you. They're not tested on a weekly basis in their respective leagues. The Premier League is that way because of the amount of money in the Premier League. And the players want to come over here because they get paid an awful lot more money than they do when they go to other countries in Europe or elsewhere. That's the simple answer in my view. Why wouldn't you? Why would you come out? You'd always come over here if you're getting paid 150 grand a week to 75 grand a week in Germany or Italy or things like that. When back in the day when we were growing up, Italian football was the place to go and play, and you get paid big money over there. Look at Gascoigne, Ince, Platt, etc., etc. They all went to go and play in Italy because that's where the money was, and that was the best league in Europe at the time.
I mean, the David Platt one was extraordinary. As a young lad with season ticket holder at Villa, seeing him disappear to Bari, it was just extraordinary. It wasn't like it was one of the big Italian teams. Okay, so I think that'll do for talking about this week's football that's gone. One thing I do want to just touch on, looking at other sport that has happened, is obviously on Wednesday there was a lot of attention about the budget. One of the things that came out in the budget, and it was expected, was an increase in various gambling taxes, and horse racing on the face of it escaped a rise in tax on it. I think it's been incredible to, as obviously someone who's in the industry, it's been incredible to see the number of people overjoyed in the horse racing industry who don't really understand the sort of knock-on consequences to all the other tax rises. So on the face of it, they think, oh, horse racing is fine, it escaped this time round. I think horse racing's in for a pretty rude awakening in terms of the finances of the sport going forward. Obviously, I know you love your horse racing, and I think horse racing is obviously in a whole world of trouble, and has been for a long time. But I just thought it was interesting that how people in racing viewed the budget this week relative to, I think, what will transpire.
Yeah, sure. But I thought the budget could have been a lot worse for racing. It could have put up gambling taxes massively. The government decided against it. The biggest elephant in the room for horse racing in the United Kingdom at the moment is the black market and offshore unregulated bookmakers that are taking, I think it's like 30% or more of the UK betting market. You just have to look at the volumes on Betfair Exchange on horse racing now, and it's minuscule to what it was when we worked at Betfair. It's frighteningly low how little money is traded on day-to-day racing. There is too much day-to-day racing in the United Kingdom. The racing is propped up by few people who've got very, very, very deep pockets. Godolphin, Coolmore, Keir Jarabjan, Almo Racing. If any of those three go, then there is big, big trouble.
Yeah, I just thought, I think some people in horse racing are so short-sighted. I think the other issue horse racing has is the levy, but that's a conversation for a different day. Obviously, last night was a great night of sport. It was Thanksgiving Day in America, which obviously meant we had a ton of NFL in addition to the various European football last night. There was some pretty interesting stuff in terms of the impacts, I think, with regard to the rest of the season. I think the biggest shock really was Kansas City losing at Dallas. Kansas City really are facing the prospect now of not making the postseason. I mean, Mahomes wasn't great last night until sort of fourth quarter. They just don't look like the Kansas City we've seen basically in the Mahomes era. Every year Mahomes has been there. I think they've made the playoffs. I don't know. I think they're in a whole world of trouble. If nothing else, I know they have obviously a ton of offensive line issues as well. And fair play to Dallas, because obviously they're beating Eagles and the Chiefs, I think, in a 5-day span. The other thing that is always vaguely amusing when you watch Thanksgiving football, particularly from Dallas, is when you see a stadium that cost as much money as it did, where the sun shines through and the players can't actually see the ball.
Yeah, comical. £2 billion stadium and you've got sunlight issues. Going back to the Chiefs, they gave away far too many penalties last night. It was over 100 yards at one point. I mean, that's just ridiculous. A couple of them were interesting hometown calls, I thought, but you're going to get that at that level of sport. They won't qualify, I don't think. What are they, 6 and 6 now?
They're about even. I mean, I had a look. They're about even money to make the playoffs now, and they've got a pretty tricky schedule. I mean, obviously with Mahomes, anything can happen. But even if they get through the playoffs, then it's not a case of getting the bye and all the other little perks that come with having a dominant regular season. Baltimore. Let's touch on Baltimore, who are in a pretty similar position to Kansas City, really, in that, I mean, they are expected to make the playoffs, but they're going into the playoffs potentially with an awful lot of question marks. They've lost 32-14 last night to the Bengals. I mean, the Bengals obviously had Joe Burrow back. His injury early in the season has been a massive loss. Yes, Flacco's done okay, but this Bengals team isn't a great team, and Baltimore were terrible. And more than just Baltimore were terrible, Lamar Jackson was terrible. He's obviously had loads of injuries recently. I think that's the first time in his career he's gone 3 games without throwing a touchdown. It was just so uninspiring. And as I say, I think even if they were to make the playoffs, I don't think too many teams are fearing playing the Ravens in the way that they may have done in previous years. I think one thing that was interesting, so with sports betting hat on a little bit, was if you spend enough time looking for edges and things like that, in the Baltimore game last night, is the Bengals were horrendous all year, a massive outlier on defensively against tight ends. And it was, last night you saw Likely and Andrews as the 2 top wide receivers effectively for the Ravens. So I think it's just interesting that if you put the time and effort in to study things like matchups, it really does present an interesting proposition. I mean, the other game was Packers against Lions. Detroit obviously had a huge blow early on with St. Brown being injured. Don't know how long he's going to be out for. I don't believe it's too serious, but it'll certainly be a couple of weeks. They just haven't looked great this season. They've obviously had a few injuries defensively, and Green Bay, I think, obviously one of Love's better games, but he's still wildly inconsistent. I mean, yesterday he had 4 touchdowns, but you also see him miss the simplest of passes. I think the one benefit they had yesterday was Parsons causing Goff all sorts of trouble in terms of how much time he had.
He was brilliant last night. Absolutely brilliant. He just smashed Goff all day, every day, and it was just remarkable defending. It was put Goff under serious amounts of pressure. But as you say about Love, he can be very high or he can be very low. There's not really much middle ground with him.
So I think one of the sport that is catching my eye at the moment is NBA. Oklahoma City Thunder, defending champions. They have started the season 18-1. They're winning games incredibly comfortably, and they tend to be going under the radar a little bit in terms of people's sort of awareness. Obviously, what they're in danger of doing, and it's still pretty early on in the season, but one of my favorite all-time sports teams was Golden State Warriors 2015-2016, where they had the 73-9 regular season, eclipsing Jordan and the Bulls, who had 72 wins. I wonder how long it will be before Oklahoma start being talked about as being realistic contenders to set a new regular season record. it's just something to keep an eye on in the background. This is one seriously good team at the moment. So I think that's all the sport from last week. Let's have a look towards this weekend. We obviously have another weekend with a full slate of Premier League games. Rather than go through each game individually, just wanted to pick a few sort of talking points out from those games this weekend. Then the biggest game by a distance is obviously the Chelsea-Arsenal game. Any thoughts, James?
You won't be tuning in to watch Sunderland versus Bournemouth, no?
You jest. I watched Sunderland-Fulham last Saturday afternoon as my game of choice.
Wow. Now, going back to Chelsea-Arsenal, obviously, yeah, it's the game of the weekend. Everyone will be watching it Sunday afternoon, 4:30, I believe. It's a big test. I see Arsenal are betting favourites. It'd be interesting to see what team Chelsea put out as a home side. Do they go with Neto up front again? I think they went up with Neto up front against Barcelona because he has the pace to get in behind that Barcelona high line. I'm not sure they'll do it against Arsenal at home on Sunday. Do they go back to João Pedro? Do they even play Delap? I'm not sure what they'll do. I liked how they played Fernandes coming from higher up rather than playing in that deep line position with Caicedo. The matchup, obviously, is Caicedo versus Rice, the two standout midfield Premier League players, along with Szoboszlai, but he's a little bit notch below those two. The first goal in that game will be absolutely huge again. And if Arsenal get it, they're hard to beat. And I worry about that Chelsea defence from corners especially. And Sanchez is an absolute mess of a goalkeeper from corners. He can't command his 6-yard box. And Arsenal will do that little thing again they always do. They'll nudge the goalkeeper just before the ball comes in to put him off his stride, not get his feet set. It comes in. The foul's already happened, as you discussed earlier, and it's very hard to reset for a goalkeeper. Watch out for that little thing at corners or free kicks that Arsenal do. Lewis Skelly did it. He won't play at the weekend. Calafiore will play. And Hincapie will play centre-back because Gabriel's still injured. If Arsenal win that, dare I say the title's theirs? Or do they bottle it again?
Well, I think you'd have to say that an Arsenal win away at the nearest rivals would be a pretty big statement. I mean, it would put them 9 points ahead of Chelsea. I think, well, they're 7 points ahead of City at the moment. So I don't think Neto will start up front again. I think he'll play off the right. I don't like Pedro in that 9 role. I think he's much better in more like a 10 role. I don't think he's particularly good at leading the line, which sort of by default would mean Delap playing there. So remains to be seen a little bit.
Would you play Gustavo?
I probably would. I think he's brilliant. He's just so much fun to watch. I suspect one of the problems you have a little bit is defensively. So yeah, they have to be a little bit careful in terms of how they line up with those front three for Chelsea. In terms of, you don't want Garnacho on one side and Esteban on the other. I don't think. Which is why Fernandes playing a little bit further forward, almost on that right-hand side, gives you a little bit more defensively. I think they'll be worried about Arsenal going forward a bit more than they will be some teams. I guess
the first goal will be huge in that game.
Well, I think I was looking at some stats yesterday, actually, and Chelsea have an unbelievable record this year when they take the lead in games. They're incredibly well suited to hitting teams on the, they're able to sit back, hit teams on the break, and, they are just incredibly efficient at doing that. So, as you say, I think that first goal in that game will be big, really big. But I think it's good test for Arsenal. I think one of the problems for Arsenal is it's obviously been a massive week in terms of Bayern in midweek. Obviously, Chelsea have had Barcelona. I mean, those games, do take quite a bit out of you. So it'll be interesting to see how both teams sort of react to that.
Mentally and physically as well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they should be okay. I mean, obviously, you just had the international break, so the players are probably a little bit fresher mentally than they might be otherwise at a different time in the season. Let's talk about Manchester United and Ruben Amorim. Tell me what you're thinking, James. Obviously, they have they are away at Crystal Palace.
Away at Crystal Palace at 12 o'clock on a Sunday when Palace had just played Strasbourg last night. I mean, count your lucky stars if you're Man United there, because that's an absolute right result playing then. I don't think Amorim's good enough for Man United. A couple of wins here or there, as we talked about the slot the other day, or earlier, sorry, that they're masking his deficiencies. He's been there a year and he's shown me nothing. The result against Everton was an absolute shambles, to be honest. You can't lose at home to Everton if you have any aspirations anyway to finish top. I don't know. Their aspiration must be to finish in the top 4 to get back in the Champions League. But to lose to Everton with 10 men after Gay got sent off for having a go at Michael Keane, and not the man of the defeat was a big worry for me if I was a United fan. The way they kept the 3 centre-backs on at half-time was just mind-bogglingly ridiculous in my view. They didn't create anything. Pickford really didn't have much to do. And it's a tough game away at Palace. They played almost the same formation as Palace do, within reason. If they lose that, well, I think the pressure will start ramping up again if they lose that. They've got a couple of easier fixtures coming up. They play West Ham on the Thursday night. There's a midweek game next week in the Premier League as well. He needs to start getting some wins again, Amorim. They aren't going to sack him. They'll give him to the summer. But I don't think they're finishing top 4 or 5 in any stretch of imagination.
I think they've had so many things in their favour this year in terms of, not crazy numbers of injuries. Obviously, Cunha was out last week. Not sure what the current situation is with Mbeumo for this weekend. Obviously, he hurt his shoulder last week. They've not had huge injuries. Martinez is almost ready to return as well. They've had no European football. The worry for them has to be if you can't, and it's pretty, whilst the Premier League's deep, it's sort of lacking in quality, I think, a little bit this year. The door is massively open for a team like Manchester United to waltz in. You only have one game a week. You haven't got many injuries. You've just spent another £200 million, particularly on strikers and forward players. I don't think Amorim's been helped particularly by, obviously, the recruitment. It seemed incredibly unbalanced in terms of squad building. They didn't need Cunha. I mean, I've said to you offline before that I was always left feeling that the Cunha transfer was a bit strange in that it felt like that he would be lined up as a replacement for Bruno if Bruno had gone to Saudi. Obviously, that didn't transpire. Yes, very unconvinced by United at the moment.
The big issue for United, quickly before we move on, is the African Cup of Nations is coming up in less than a month's time now. And Mbeumo and Diallo both go. That's quite a big chunk of their forward line, goal scoring and creativity that's going, especially now Sesko's injured for the next 4 to 6 weeks. Cunha's got a little niggle. Zirkzee not Man United quality. Mount is on the bench. He probably can't stay fit. Where are they going to score some goals from?
I think the only thing in their favour is that because they haven't got Carabao Cup football, they won't have many Premier League games. I suspect the number of games that the players are actually missing for African Cup of Nations. Obviously, it depends on how far the the players get in their various teams. But you could see a situation where they're not actually missing that many games. You could see, I remember last time is you had players missing 2 or 3 games, if that, it really wasn't the sort of impact that it has done in previous years. But I do think Amorim, I think the media narrative will turn against him pretty quickly if, and I think Crystal Palace actually match up really well with them this weekend in terms of the wing backs that obviously Palace have. So Palace will sit deep, which I don't think suits United. It's going to be interesting. I mean, obviously Palace playing away at Strasbourg and then getting a 12 o'clock kickoff is just ridiculous. So that is obviously United's favour, but I think it could be a long afternoon for United. Let's talk about Thomas Frank and Tottenham.
They made the right decision in the summer to get rid of Ange. Where they finished in the Premier League was shambolic. Winning the Europa League, yeah, well done, congratulations. They beat Bodø/Glimt in the semi-final and they beat a poor Man United. Good decision to get rid of Ange. Pointing Frank. Oh, I wasn't convinced at the time. I'm certainly not convinced now. He doesn't know his best 11, and we're in November. We talked about Slot not knowing his best 11 earlier. Frank doesn't know his best 11. Sometimes he plays 4-2-3-1, and in recent weeks, well, against Arsenal, first half they were a shambles. They played 3-5-1-1, or I don't know what they played, kind of thing. He rectified it and played 4-2-3-1. Wasn't much better. Then in the week, I don't know what he played in the week, really. He played Archie Gray, who hasn't played for months, who is a fantastic player, by the way. And if anyone wants a hybrid player, Tottenham, he's the one to go and look at. He should be playing for England, which certainly should be in and around the England squad. And his brother at Leeds is apparently even better than him.
So Frank's I think they played
under huge pressure.
I think they played a 4-2-2-2 against Paris Saint-Germain.
So another formation change.
And what was interesting about it in terms of Gray is when Paris Saint-Germain had the ball, is he would almost drop into the back 4 to make a sort of third central defender.
So another formation change when you haven't had much time to do it on the training field and things like that. Players will be confused. Yeah, it's going to be a long season for Tottenham. We'll see. I could see 3 or 4 managers in the summer. We were talking about it in the summer who aren't there. Big managers at big clubs.
I think the one thing I would say is that Paris Saint-Germain game, particularly in the first half, they actually looked like they looked a lot better than they have done in recent games against Chelsea, Arsenal. They actually, obviously playing Bergvall and Sarr, it actually gives them some legs in midfield, and they had an energy about them that made Paris Saint-Germain pretty uncomfortable, to be honest. I thought, you could easily have made a case that Spurs were probably the better team in that first half. So I think in that respect, obviously some progress made, but
you look at their fixtures. Newcastle, they play away at Newcastle on Tuesday night. They're at home to Brentford on Saturday. They play home to Slavia Prague on the Tuesday 9th in the Champions League. That'll be an easy victory. Then they're away at Nottingham Forest on a Sunday, and then they play Liverpool, and then they're away at Palace. That's not an easy few Premier League fixtures at all.
Well, I think just looking at the game against even Fulham, I know that obviously Romero's out suspended for it, which will probably limit the options that Frank has. I think one of the problems they have in that game is that Fulham will sit deep, and Tottenham, particularly under Frank, have proven to be pretty. I mean, obviously they've not played great in recent weeks. They really struggle to break down teams who play in a low block, and that's what Fulham will do. And Fulham have a bit of pace, going the other way, and they could cause Spurs some issues. It feels like a hugely important game in sort of Frank's tenure at Tottenham. A bad result there, and obviously they're coming off the trip to Paris, which obviously is not going to help them. I think he could be in a world of trouble come Christmas time.
Yeah, definitely. Would Stott go there? They wanted him, didn't they, before they appointed Ange? Or is Stott holding out for Barcelona? Who knows?
Surely we can see Pochettino. Can we not see Pochettino return again?
I think he's quite happy probably leaving wherever he is in America with the World Cup there next year at the moment, to be honest with you. Or Jose coming out from Benfica, who knows?
That's enough football for now. Let's obviously it's not this weekend, so it's not until next Thursday. Let's just touch on the Ashes cricket quickly. Obviously, England lost by 8 wickets in that first test. It looks like the Aussies will be unchanged for the second test. It looks like Hazelwood and Cummins aren't fit. Test at Brisbane, a day-night one, under lights, with a pink ball. What are you thinking?
2-0 Australia. The worry for me, for the England, is under Stokes and McCullum and Bazball, is they don't learn. They double down, which is fine. I understand it at top-level sport. Well, I don't understand top-level sport, but because I've never played it. I understand they have their methods and they're not going to go away from it. And I understand their reasoning for not playing this warm-up game in Canberra because it's on a different surface, etc., yada, yada, yada. England, this is a unique game of cricket. It's not a normal game with a red ball. It's a unique game of cricket where you have to practice under those conditions you're going to play in next test match. Jamie Smith has never played a pink ball test match. He's a keeper and a top 7 bat. Gus Atkinson has never played a pink ball game. England have Crawley's got 0, got a pair in Perth. He needs them in middle practice, in my view. They're not going to do it. They've doubled down on it. They're going to have 5 days of practice in Brisbane where they're playing. They're lucky that Cummins isn't going to play and Hazelwood's not going to play. I can't see anything more than an Australia victory, to be honest there.
I mean, Cummins and Hazelwood with a pink ball would have been interesting.
Well, you got Start. I don't know who'd rather face. If you're trying to get down the other end, one end you got Start bowling, and the other end you got Hazelwood or Cummins bowling. They won't pick line.
I guess that's the only thing that really gives England a little bit of hope is that, they obviously do have a decent bowling lineup, potentially. And it's not as if it's a Australian batting lineup that particularly scares you.
It'll be interesting to see what they do with Khawaja, if they keep him or they play Head and they bring in someone like an Inglis. I'd imagine they could pick Bo Webster as well or Michael Nessa to replace Nathan Lyon. I don't think you need a spinner in Brisbane under lights.
So are you thinking England same 11 then? Obviously, don't need spinner. Or do you think
same 11 unless Tongue replaces Wood, but Wood hadn't had that much cricket. He only bowled about 7 overs or something in Perth. They will pick the same 11 bar Tongue or Wood. I wouldn't. But they haven't got really a spare batsman in it. They're not going to pick Jacks to open ahead of Crawley. And they're not going to pick Bethel ahead of Pope, who actually looked the best bat, actually. Same 11, probably. 2-0 Australia. What, 5-0 Australia? I think it's second. I think it's second in the market behind Australia 4-1 or something, isn't it, nowadays? Going back to those stats for you, England have won 9 test matches in 40 years in Australia, and 3 of them were on the 2010-11 series. England have got to win 3 test matches out of 4 in Australia to win this Ashes series. Pigs will fly first before England win 3 test matches in Australia out of 4. Not happening.
Well, you like this one, James. England, so Australia are more likely to win the series 5-0 than England are to win the series now. So it could be a long, long winter for Stokes and Bazball.
I'm not sure I'll be wanting to get up at 12:30 or whenever it is in the morning to watch another thumping by Australia and Sydney in the New Year. Thanks very much.
Obviously, not much golf this weekend. There's just a European Tour event. This European Tour has started out in Australia, in Brisbane, actually, ironically. The Australian PGA Championship, the likes of Adam Scott playing in it, but it's very underwhelming type of stuff. Rugby this weekend, James?
International outside the international window. Wales' third 15 are playing South Africa's second 15. South Africa win by 40 points if they want to. They've gone a 7-1 split. It won't be a game I'll be watching. Other things, the Gallagher Premiership in the UK is back. I'm a Northampton fan. They play away against Bristol. And it's very quiet after the last 4 weekends where England are 11 from 11 and marching forward towards the Six Nations, which I'm sure we'll talk about in future weeks. We might do a special podcast on the Six Nations when it's closer to time in the beginning of February, when a Grand Slam could be on decider in Paris against the French on a Saturday afternoon, evening in the Stade de France.
It'd certainly be a pretty tasty spectacle. Not much in terms of darts. The only darts is the draw for the World Championship has taken place. Littler faces Labanakas, or however you pronounce it. The more interesting thing for Littler is that potentially he would face Gerwyn Price or Chris Dobie in the quarterfinals, which is a little bit tricky. I think the good news, obviously, for darts is that him and Humphreys can't meet until the final. The only other interesting one really is that Beau Greaves plays against Daryl Gurney. She's really pretty special. So that's going to be a properly difficult test for Gurney. It'd be interesting to see how that pans out. I think, is that just any boxing, James?
Not really. Ben Whittaker's making his debut on DAZN tomorrow night, but apart from that, no, it's not really. The biggest talking point, obviously, is Joshua Paul in Miami a couple of days before Christmas. We'll talk about that closer to the time.
There is some snooker this weekend. First of the Triple Crown events, the UK Championships. Obviously, all on BBC, which makes it easy watching for people. Zintong is the favourite in the event. Trump, defending champion. I guess the biggest talking point actually isn't about either of those two. It's about the return of Ronnie O'Sullivan, who just hasn't played much recently. He's obviously had a few of the various Ronnie type issues, but it'll be so interesting to see how he gets on this week.
Yeah, he's got new Q. He's living out in Dubai. Recently got married. How much practice has Ronnie been doing? He doesn't do a lot these days. He's near enough 50 these days. You never know with Ronnie. I actually like Neil Roberts in this tournament this week or next week as a player to keep an eye on. Back to some sort of form, yeah.
I think Zintong, I find Zintong fascinating. You know, he's won this tournament before, defending world champion, won recently in Riyadh season, so he's in some form now, having missed some of the season with illness. It'll be interesting to see. But it's, I mean, obviously don't watch as much snooker as sort of used to growing up. I tend to find it a bit of a filler if there's nothing else on.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's always something to keep an eye on during the day when there's nothing going on midweek kind of thing. It's always something to watch.
So
the skill level, by the way, of snooker is always fascinates me how good these players actually are. It's, as people know who play pool or snooker, it's one of the hardest sports going out there. And we always talk about it. What's harder? A 1, 4, 7, and 9 darter. It's not even close. I'll let you know
obviously
who it is.
Obviously, it's a hole in one, James.
Yeah, the biggest fluke in sport. Yeah. Moving on.
So this weekend...
Every dog has their day, Luke.
8 time, James. Formula One this weekend. Obviously, the World Title Championship is coming to a head. We have Qatar this weekend, Abu Dhabi next weekend. Obviously, there was all the shenanigans with disqualifications last week for the McLaren guys, and the way it sort of transpires is that Lando has a 24-point lead on both Max and Piastri. So game on again from nowhere, really.
Yeah, it's a sprint race as well in Qatar this weekend, so there's an extra 8 points for the winner on Saturday afternoon. I mean, it'd be an all-time choke if McLaren don't win this under Norris. I mean, going back to it, I read a report from respected ex-F1 designer in the paper. He was talking about how it was pretty poor for McLaren to be anywhere close to having their disqualification. They should have realised that don't do anything stupid, just take some points. And then McLaren come out this week and say they've had poisoning, which is they had in Formula One a couple of years ago with a lot of jumping up and down straights, etc. Norris should win it, but pressure does funny things to funny people at different times, especially when how high pressurized situation the F1 is at the moment and how quickly you have to make decisions because it happens very quickly.
I'm not sold on Norris.
No, me neither. No.
Under pressure, to be honest. But let's wait and see. It should be. So it's certainly something fun to watch on Sunday. Obviously, NFL again this weekend. The most interesting game. Well, we'll actually get the bonus tonight. So Friday evening of Chicago against Philadelphia. Chicago, the Bears are on a good run at the moment. I think they've won 8 out of the last 9 games. Williams doing a good job, or a manageable job at quarterback. I'm not convinced by the Eagles and Hurts at all this season.
Talking of NFL, as a betting person like yourself, any thoughts on the Super Bowl? Any team that you go, might be worth having a or having a looking out for in the next couple of weeks when you're coming up to the playoffs?
I think the most interesting team just from an eye test rather than potentially stats test is I think Seattle looking interesting. I think they have a particularly well balanced team, so it's not a case of like Buffalo where they have a good offense and a poor defense, or they're pretty balanced. They have a pretty underrated defense. I think offensively, obviously they're reliant on Darnold, and that would be the big question mark. But I think things are wide open this year, and there's a lot of the bigger names like your Bills and your Chiefs and your Ravens that we've seen in previous years. Not convinced by. Obviously, the Rams are going well, and they have a pretty relatively easy game this weekend. But yeah, so I mean, I quite like the Seahawks. I think they'll do pretty well, I think. Any final question, James? Any horse racing this week? Well, I know there's some horse racing this weekend. Tell all.
Yeah, in the UK, in Newcastle tomorrow, you've got the Fighting Fists. You've got apparently the best horse over hurdles ever in Constitutional Hill. If you listen to Nicky Henderson, he's old. He won't be winning tomorrow. I think he's fighting for, excuse the pun, it's not intended. He is top of the market with the New Line, the Skelton's horse. No thank you at 15-8. He is falling out of love with the game. He had a gallop at Newbury the other day, and Nicky Henderson's talking nonsense about it. He's back. Well, we've heard it all before, Henderson. And then over in Ireland on Sunday, you have the Group 1 race over hurdles with T2 running. So a couple of decent races this weekend from across the channel.
Right, I think we'll call that a day. Thank you very much, James. I look forward to another weekend full of sport, and hopefully we will be able to catch up talking about it on Monday morning.
Yep, Luke, have a good weekend and chat to everyone on Monday. Cheers. All right.